Arcadian Atlas is a game that I've been trying to get into for a while. There have been quite a few starts and stops on this one, but I found it to be a pretty fun game. I think if it was released in the late 90s or early 2000s, it probably would have been comparable to Final Fantasy Tactics or Tactics Ogre or Vandal Hearts. It isn't perfect, but it's a fairly good game. So the story gets pretty confusing. There are some plot points that never get followed up on, which I was a little disappointed about, but let me go over just some of the basics. You have a queen and a king. The king is being poisoned. It's originally thought that the queen was doing it, but it turns out it's her sort of evil bodyguard type person named Wolf. Wolf and the queen are in love, I think. I'm assuming that's what's happening. Whatever. It doesn't really matter that much. So the king dies, and then his two daughters get declared bastards. They are Lucrezia and Annalise. Lucrezia decides she is going to start up a rebellion, and she raises an army to fight against the queen, who she sees as the person who killed her father. Annalise gets sent into exile with a bunch of mages on this island. So that's kind of interesting. She ends up there with a character named Fennec, who also gets picked up by your party as you're bringing Annalise to this island to go into exile. This actually leads me to one thing that I have an issue with in the story. Not everything is presented to the player, and unless you go to one of the taverns to kind of listen to some of the chatter that goes on there, you're going to miss out on some pretty important information that kind of fleshes things out. It's kind of how I felt when I played Jade Cocoon, and a lot of the lore and everything is off into one area where if you don't visit it, you don't get any of it. That's kind of how I felt with this. Getting back to the plot, though, we have our two main characters, Vashti and Desmond. They are basically lovers, and you get a lot of character building with them that I think is really awesome. They get split up. They end up on opposite sides of this war. Vashti goes with Princess Lucrezia, and Desmond stays with the queen. And they kind of meet up every once in a while, but for the most part, they're going to be on opposite sides of this. At least for the first, probably half of the game. Yeah, about a half to two-thirds of the game, they're on opposite sides. Maybe a little bit less than that, but whatever. So both sides end up doing a whole bunch of horrible shit in this game. While I was playing it, I kept wondering, I was like, are there any good characters that I can actually root for in this? Because Lucrezia is a horrible person, the Queen's a horrible person, Wolf is a horrible person. Ida, who I thought was going to be a good person, starts doing some pretty reprehensible shit as well. And you're just left with Vashti and Desmond, and you're kind of hoping that they get back together and and everything ends up happy for them. Yeah. So just be prepared for a whole bunch of disappointment in this. So Fennec and Annalise start messing around with something called the Atlas. And that is basically a series of tarot cards that all somehow have the faces of our main characters on them. When you use these tarot cards, you can, summon monsters, you can summon good things as well. It doesn't have to all be bad. But the way that Annalise and Fennec use them, it turns out really bad. Especially when Fennec gets killed, and that sort of drives Annalise crazy. She ends up killing the queen, and that puts Lucrezia on the throne, so that's great. And then things keep going, because now you're hunting down Wolf, and you're also trying to stop Annalise from killing everyone in the world. So that took a really hard turn, and it's a pretty fun turn. It's a nice twist to the game. So near the end of the game, Ida starts being a good person again, which is great. Lucrezia joins you in the final battle to take down Fennec, who's been revived by Annalise, and you have this big battle, which is pretty awesome. And then it just kind of stops. I think that's probably the best way of saying it. It just kind of stops. Vashti and Desmond ride off into the distance, so hopefully they're going to be happy. Lucrezia is still the queen, and Ida goes back to her village. Annalise is alive, but just kind of like emotionally broken because Fennec died. Fennec's dead, Wolf's dead. Yeah, it was a little weird when I watched it at first, but I'll talk more about the ending later. I know it sounds like I've got a lot of bad things to say about this story, but I really do like it. I just wish some of the plot points had been better followed up on, and maybe that was just me missing something. Like, Lucrezia tries to recruit this necromancer to raise an army of the dead to fight against her mom, and you kill the necromancer to stop that, but nobody ever asks any questions about it. It's never brought up to Lucrezia. She never asks what happened to the necromancer. It's just sort of ignored, and then they move on. The whole poisoning the king thing just gets dropped, which I thought was going to be more important. Like, maybe you expose the fact that Wolf did it, but it gets explained in the dialogue. Nah, it's done. Don't worry about it. We're going to move past that. So it's little things like that where I got annoyed by them, but the overall story is really good. I really do like the gameplay in Arcadian Atlas. It reminds me a lot of Tactics Ogre in terms of its story, but the combat reminds me a little bit more of Vandal Hearts. I know the developers said that they were inspired by Final Fantasy Tactics, and maybe I should go and play that game again because I'm not really seeing it. I'm just seeing more of some of the other tactical RPGs that I've played. So during the game, you're going to be alternating between Desmond and Vashti. Most of the story and most of the gameplay is going to be centering around Vashti, but you do play as Desmond quite a bit. Both of them are going to be as cavaliers, so they're going to basically be your swordsmen. I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. You also have a bunch of other characters in here, like Ida is going to be a playable character, and then you've got this little mutant raccoon man who's an archer, and I love him so much. He has no dialogue in the game. I'm not really sure why he's there, but he's so cool. And then you have a whole bunch of other characters that you can recruit, and I'll talk more about that in a minute because that was one of the more frustrating things in this game, is just recruiting all the different characters and trying to keep them all leveled up. So in battle, you've got your standard action menu that pops up. You can move your units around, you can have them attack, defend, that sort of thing. There are no items in this game, which I found really confusing, so you don't have any health items, nothing that can replenish your skill points or your magic points, and nothing that would like enhance your defense or your attack or anything like that. So that was a little strange, and it puts an awful lot more pressure on your apothecaries, which are going to be your healer units. They're essentially the white mages of this universe. You're also not going to be commanding very many units in this game. On average, you have a party of 5. There are some missions where you have less than that, and there's maybe 1 or 2 missions where you have 6. But by and large, you're going to have 5 playable characters in this. And that feels really small for a game like this. I was expecting anywhere from like 8 to 12. That's usually pretty standard for a lot of these tactical RPGs. And for this one to only have 5, that's a little disappointing. It is understandable because a lot of the enemies that you're going to be facing, you're not really going to be going up against more than maybe 5 to 7 characters. But it feels a little small for something that's supposed to be this big war that's going on. So what are the units in this game? You have 4 base units, your Apothecary, Cavalier, Ranger, and Warmancer. Your apothecary is basically your white mage, the warmancer is essentially a black mage, your ranger is going to be your archer, and then your cavalier is basically your knight. There are specializations for each of these, so that's pretty cool. You can turn your apothecary into more of like a battle mage that doesn't really heal a whole lot. You can turn your cavalier into basically a knight, like a one-handed sword spec, and then you have a two-handed sword spec. Your ranger can basically be a crossbowman, or it can be a regular archer, and the warmancer can just learn one of 3 different elemental magics. It's pretty fun, and it does offer a little bit of customization. Not as much as I really would have thought, but it is pretty cool. You can then promote your characters. The Cavalier can get promoted to either a Ronin or an Inquisitor. The Apothecary can become a Monk or a Shaman. The Warmancer can become a Sorcerer or a Druid. And the Ranger can become a Hunter or a Reaver. I did see one thing where they said that there were a total of 10 promotable classes. That did not match what I saw in this game. Maybe I missed something, but there were only 8 when I played through it, so if I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments. These promotions seem to happen around level 18, and this is probably a good time for me to transition into one of the more annoying parts of just the gameplay, is leveling up your characters. If your character does not participate in a battle, it does not gain experience points. That's perfectly understandable. It does mean that you're going to want to keep a smaller number of units because you're not using all of them in each battle. Not every battle needs you to have them all. And, well, when you recruit new units, they come in at either the level of your main characters or one level below them. So you're going to be dismissing a lot of the weaker units that have no chance of leveling up anymore because there's no training in this game. That was kind of odd to me, but I can understand why the developers didn't put it in there, and instead they had it so, if you need to get a unit that's stronger, you can just recruit a new one. I'm not really sure how I feel about it. I understand why it's there, but I kind of hate the fact that I'm losing all these characters that I was kind of personally invested in, or at least, was rooting for in some way. And then when you dismiss them, they'll give you this little woe is me, you're ruining my life speech when you're kicking out like a level 10 character because everybody else is up to level 18 and the level 10's never going to be able to get up to level 18 just by playing the game. It's very odd, but I completely understand why they did it, just to keep everything moving along. I'd say about 2/3 into the game, you're mostly going to be fighting monsters. There are going to be a few times where you're fighting humans, but mostly you're fighting these kind of cool-looking monsters, but sometimes they look a little bit generic. They're like floating eyes, and then maybe some wolves. I think they look kind of cool, at least the floating eye characters do. And then they throw some essentially boss characters at you. They feel like just another enemy that happens to have like 500 hit points. So it's cool that they're there and everything, but I wish there were more of them, because that really made the game kind of interesting. You go along, all of a sudden you have just this big badass that you need to beat up. The final battle was actually a little disappointing for me because it just threw like 4 boss characters at you and then a bunch of little characters that you don't really need to pay attention to. And this should probably be where I talk about the mission objectives. Most of them are going to be defeat all enemies, which is pretty standard for a game like this. But then you do have a few missions where you need to protect a certain character or you need to defeat a certain character in order to win. And those are kind of fun. They help break things up a little bit. You also have at least 1 or 2 missions where you just have to make it to a certain point. And the developers are nice enough to let you know, okay, here are the squares that you need to get to in order to really advance this mission. That's pretty nice to see. I do like that they threw some other missions in here just to kind of break things up so you're not doing the same thing over and over. The game does have permadeath, so that's kind of cool. You basically have 3 turns once a character is knocked out to either revive them or win. If you can't do that, then that character is lost forever. Sometimes this happens to your main characters. If one of them dies, then you lose and you have to start over. That's okay. Aside from the fact that the game doesn't have an auto save, so if you didn't save the game before you went into a battle and you die, you have to go back to where your previous save was. This feels very much like an old school game, so I kind of like it, but I can see how some newer players might be a little bit upset by something like this. It kind of reminds me of a lot of the tactical RPGs from the 90s, where this kind of craziness would happen, I'd forget to save, and then end up losing like 3 missions of progress because I was stupid. It's kind of cool, actually. Overall, I would say I like the gameplay quite a bit. It's pretty good, but there are just some weird things to it. It always feels like... It always felt like I was on a knife edge, where I was either going to win and keep all my characters alive, or I was just going to completely fall apart and die. It felt like there was no middle ground in it whatsoever. So planning out your strategy early on seems to help out quite a bit, which shouldn't be too big of a surprise for a game like this. This is a beautiful game. I really love the pixel art. The animations on the sprites and the spells, it just all looks really good. It's really one of the most beautiful retro-inspired games that I've seen. It's right up there with something like Sea of Stars. You can't move the camera in this. At least I haven't found a way to do that. So you're locked into that one isometric view. And it causes some problems whenever like a building gets in your way. That's the most annoying goddamn part of this game. The developers tried to address this by making the building somewhat transparent, or the floating islands somewhat transparent whenever you run into those, and I don't think it really helps all that much. It just made it harder for me to actually line up certain things. Thankfully, there's no time limit on your turns, so you can take your time to try to line up your attack spells or your ranged attacks. But it just caused a bunch of weird issues for me where I thought I was lined up correctly with someone, only to find out that I'm, one space off or something like that. It was really kind of weird. Normally when I play a game like this, I expect like the L and R buttons to basically shift or rotate the camera around, and that didn't happen here. Maybe I'm missing something, or maybe I'm just not doing it right, but it just felt a little strange. The developers were able to convey a lot of emotions with the different character sprites. This was pretty hard to do back in the 90s, but it's a lot easier now, and I think they just did an excellent job of it. When somebody's upset or sad, you can see that in this. When they're happy, you can tell. When they're kind of embarrassed about what's going on, you can see that. It's a really, really great looking game, and I love it so much. Overall, I think the graphics and the music are very good. I really love how this game looks. It reminds me of one of the really high-end PS1 games, and that's a good thing. It reminds me an awful lot of just how Final Fantasy Tactics looked, how Tactics Ogre looked, and also how Sayuki Journey of the West looked. All of those were really great looking games, and yeah, this is another one that just looks amazing. I really do wonder how many people stuck around for the ending of this game. So what you're seeing now is the before credits stuff. You see Vashti and Desmond, they're living alone, and Desmond, who's basically been getting killed by these Atlas cards throughout the entire game, is now blind. This is not too long after the final battle and everything, where he seals a bunch of the cards, and wanders off into the distance. Throughout the end of the game, he's basically been collecting these cards, and it's slowly killing him. That really wasn't made totally clear to me, but it is there, but it wasn't made completely clear during the game. So now Desmond's blind, he's basically on his last legs, and he's living on the coast with Vashti. And their cool little mutant raccoon man, who is amazing, by the way. I love the fact that he's there. He really doesn't serve a purpose, but I'm so glad he's there. And he provided so much comic relief while I was playing this. So Vashti sits down to read a book to Desmond. This was something that was shown in a cutscene earlier. Apparently, Desmond, in another war that they were fighting, gets injured. He doesn't know how to read, but he wants Vashti to bring him this book, and Vashti sits down and reads it to him. She also offers to teach him how to read. It's kind of a cool little moment to sort of show the bond between these two. So Desmond ends up passing away, and that is seemingly the end of the game. A few more of the Atlas cards get collected, and then we sort of fade to black and we get the credits. It's a bit of a strange ending, and if you sit through the credits, then you actually find out what happened. So the post-credit scene picks up 1 year after everything that's happened. We have Annalise, who is basically living by herself because, she just didn't die. Nobody decided to kill her. And she is just sort of dealing with everything that's happened. She had somehow fallen in love with Fennec. Fennec died twice. And she's just sort of trying to live her life the best she can. We learn that there has been a revolt against Lucrezia, and she's been overthrown. So now the country doesn't have a queen anymore and has no leadership. Lucrezia finds Annalise, somehow, never says anything to her, just stands there as Annalise is like, yeah, you shouldn't have been the queen, that's what Dad said, you've messed everything up, blah, blah, blah. And then Lucrezia stabs her and kills her. Then Lucrezia basically finds another Atlas card that reveals that she was going to do this. That's kind of something the Atlas cards have been doing throughout this entire game. It's a little strange, and I don't exactly know why, but maybe I missed that part when I was going into one of the taverns and didn't read all of the information I should have. So, after she kills Annalise, she walks over to the edge, and she jumps off and kills herself. So now both members of the royal family are dead, and yeah, that happened. And you're just wondering what other gut punches this game is going to throw at you, because so you've seen Desmond die somewhat peacefully. It was fine. Then you see Annalise and Lucrezia die, and you're just sort of like, what the fuck happened? And why? Okay. Then it jumps to Ida, basically our fifth main character who survived the final battle. She is just living her life in her village that's been rebuilt because Lucrezia, or no, not Lucrezia, but the queen had burned her village to the ground for reasons. So she's just living her best life, doing whatever she can. Good for her. Her family has made it out. These other two people who I thought were going to be more important to the game, they made it out. And then you see Vashti and the fun little mutant raccoon who's still alive. They both walk in, and they were apparently expected. They meet up and talk with, Ida a little bit, and you find out that Vashti was pregnant with Desmond's child, which is kind of cool. That's pretty fun. It basically gives a happy ending to all of this. So you have Vashti, our mutant raccoon man, and then you have Ida. They're all still alive. They're happy and everything. And then Desmond's baby is there because Vashti somehow got pregnant, which was never brought up before. And yeah, it's kind of a happy ending. It's one that was a lot better than the ending they left you at, before the credits. So, yeah, the ending's pretty good, assuming that you stayed through the whole credit sequence. Yeah, this went on a lot longer than I thought it was going to, but yeah, that happens sometimes. Anyway, I really like the game. I think the graphics are beautiful. The gameplay is pretty good, but it does have some issues that I don't really like that much. And I think it's just because it's an indie game and it's a smaller development team, so I can kind of forgive them on quite a bit of that. The story, I think, for the most part, I like. There are a few plot points that I wish had been fleshed out a lot more that just kind of get dropped or ignored. And for a while in this game, I was just hoping for somebody to root for. And thankfully, they did do that with Desmond and Vashti. That just, yeah, that was probably the bright spot of all this, is seeing these two end up on different sides and then coming back together. And also the mutant raccoon man, who just made me smile whenever he did anything crazy. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.